think it's a little hard just to work around there.
We'll see. I think if we can go in, it would have something.
Back later. Okay. Yeah, I think you're great. Probably once a year.
What's that? Oh, I know. There's just so much. I actually tried to see if I could print it out on a large piece of paper, but they didn't have it. There wasn't any in the copier. One more.
Even I could use it.
Everybody got two handouts. Everybody not? All right. Get these here.
Don't take this personally.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha. All right.
You choose where you want to be. I'll get that.
We will commence now. Lots to go through today. I'm going to try to keep this as clear as possible. And if you're situated in your pews near a Bible, we will be drawing on the Bible today at certain points. All right. And we will be referring to the Bible at times. So if you find that, great. Okay, so lots of material today. We're going to try to cover kind of the time of the judges up until the exile, the Babylonian exile. I don't know if we're going to get as far as that or not. There's lots and lots of information to, there's and a lot of history to go through. If at some point you're just like lost, please raise your hand, because there's a lot. We're going to do a lot of map work and stuff and people and so forth. Let's start though with a prayer. Holy God, we know that faith and belief is all theory, that really where the rubber hits the road is where our lived experience is where we meet you, but we also meet others, and we struggle with decisions to be made and listen for your voice. Help us as we study the history of your interaction with this particular people, that you keep our minds open to also the ways that you also interact with us, that we may see our lives in theirs, in Christ's name. Amen. All right. I'm going to close this door. I can hear my dog barking. He's very upset that he's not joining us here, but this morning I have 2 dogs to take care of, and I just thought, no, that's just too much. 2 dogs and 1,000 years of history or whatever. No, let's not do it. So what I want to do is kind of back up just slightly and bring us back to Mount Sinai. And we kind of looked at Israel from the early beginnings with Abraham and Sarah, that call into the emergence into the land of Canaan. So this is really before the emergence, but something I just want to touch on that will become important in Israelite history. As the Bible describes this group of escaped slaves, they come out of Egypt. They're just kind of carrying whatever they possibly can, whatever they just can't leave behind. And at one point they encamp at Mount Sinai, according to the story, and Moses takes up an offering. They want to build some form of like a tent shrine. They call it the tabernacle for God, a place as kind of a special demarcated place to worship God, and where God and the people could meet. And bear in mind that Israel is a very tangible religion. There's everything in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures is. They're not like the Greeks where they had all this theoretical language. Like, there's no place in the Hebrew Scriptures where it talks about like the power of God. Power is an abstract term. They talk about God's right hand. It's very concrete, very embodied kind of faith. And so the stories are very concrete, embodied. So when they talk about God meeting up with us, it's not just kind of this theoretical kind of invisible kind of thing. They also make it very concrete. And so some of these stories, whether it happened that way or not, they're trying to illustrate things that make visible things that are oftentimes invisible. So they're going to set up a tent shrine called Tabernacle to meet with God. It's not to imply that God only comes to that place, but they're trying to signal that this is a very special sacred time where they felt a special closeness to the divine, and they undoubtedly did create something called the tabernacle there, which will figure very prominently in Israel's history. So they take this offering, and it says the Holy Spirit filled a couple of people with some special creativity, and it's this wonderful story of you take up this offering, and they have so much offering that Moses finally says, stop, we've got way more than enough to build this tabernacle. I mean, I've never heard a church offer a stewardship message that's more powerful than this. Like, stop giving, we've got enough. And but that's what happened, and so people gave, and they started to create this beautiful little tent shrine that covered with many colors, kind of this indigo and gold interwoven, and then inside that tent there was this understanding that as you moved into the tent, it became more and more holy until you got to the very end of the tent, and this is kind of a cutaway. You'd have there you go. Outside, you'd have the the sacrificial offerings being made on a platform. You'd go in, and this would be kind of a general worship space. And as you move into the tabernacle, the artistry and the level of craftsmanship gets increasing. They had this understanding of kind of graduated holiness that you could actually, and they were signaling this because when you get to the back, that would have been curtained off. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was, which was considered the holiest item in all of Israel. This is where in many depictions of it, people would depict it like a throne, like God was thought to be invisibly enthroned above on the Ark of the Covenant. Likely, we know from ancient Near Eastern sources that probably this was not conceived as a throne, but actually a footstool of God. That we have a lot of like treaty texts and depictions in the ancient, like from Mesopotamia and so forth, that depict the king sitting on a throne and his subject approaching him. They're going to talk business, but on the king, you see with his throne, has a footstool. It's not like the throne is just down on the ground. You naturally just put your feet on the ground. There's a footstool, but that footstool actually was a box that contained the text of the agreement between the king and his vassal. And so if there's any, they're talking business, if there's any question about it, well, the king has got his feet right on it. It's kind of a symbol of power too. And likely, and this was the conception of the agreement that God makes with Israel. According to the story, and again, it's kind of, these stories, do they happen exactly this way or not? Who knows? But the bottom line is they felt at Mount Sinai they had an agreement with God. It was kind of a reiteration of the covenant promise made with Abraham and Sarah long ago. You will become a great people. You'll dwell in your own land, and through you will become a blessing to all the nations. And Israel has a sojourn in Egypt. They've kind of lost track of a lot of things, but God takes them out, and then at Mount Sinai says basically, are you good with this? You'll be I want to set you apart as this special people, not because you're any better than anybody else, but basically because I need to work through this people to achieve my purposes. And God says, if you say yes, think about it, because if you do say yes, there'll be some blessings that will come to you, but also some responsibilities. And so we know from the Hebrew Scriptures there are 613 separate laws that Jews continue to refer to today. So there's a lot. That's the covenant text. And that covenant then would have gone into that box, which they called the Ark of the Covenant. And so, this ark and this tabernacle will continue to factor very heavily into Israel's history. That's why I wanted to back up and refer to it. But it's closed off in the tabernacle because only specially trained priests can go in and replace the incense and the offerings that would be made there. Later, the temple itself, when they built a temple in Jerusalem, they would model it after this tabernacle. And it just kind of be more like instead now in stone and so forth, and much larger. And they would continue to have the Holy of Holies back there. And it's said that the priests, it might be a once in a lifetime, or at least once every many years, opportunity to be selected to be the priest that dares to go back behind that curtain and be so close to God's presence. It was thought to be wonderful but dangerous. You have this how far are we from the divine? If the divine is thought to be especially close, are you holy enough to be in the presence of that divine? And so they would tie a rope to this. They said that they tie a rope to the right foot of the priest, and the priest would go behind in case something happened back there. They wouldn't have to go in behind it. They could just pull him out, And so, who knows kind of the psycho-spiritual dynamics here, but if you do, kind of think about the mind-body-spirit connections and so forth, if you and your people have designated a spot where you have set aside as especially holy, you can imagine anybody actually going behind that curtain might actually have a significant spiritual experience because your whole programming is to be open in that way. Yes? Would we have seen the temple if we would have gone to Israel? No, that was destroyed. It was destroyed 2 times, one by the Babylonians in the early 6th century, and then it was rebuilt after the return from exile, and then it was destroyed in 70 CE. so by the Romans. So there is no temple there. There's the you can see the Temple Mount, however, is still there, and you can still see pieces of that complex. But the Romans, huh? Yes, so that whole kind of palatial complex, and so forth. There's one wall they call the Western Wall that was not destroyed. They've called that in the past the Wailing Wall. That's where people come and make prayers. You put prayers in the cracks of the between the stones, and you can still see, if you wander the Temple Mount, you can still see where they used to, like the Passover festival, they used to slaughter so many lambs that people would kind of spread out to stations all over the Temple Mount, and they were actually these kind of well areas to deal with all the blood that would be contained in the sacrifice. There's many, many areas throughout the Temple Mount for that. You can still see that. So the point is that this is an extremely holy thing. People do not even look at it lightly. Without a lot of training, and this will be, and it's really seen to be wherever that ark is, that's where God is especially present, and those are the things to remember as we move into the period of the Judges. So now we're going to skip ahead. They've now come into the land. We talked about how things may not be exactly the way they appear in the Bible. The book of Joshua implies like they came and they wiped out the peoples, and it happened very quickly and very successfully. The book of Judges, though, depicts a much slower process that is not simply wiping out all the people there. There's a lot of people in the land who were there, who still are in the land. And any critical scholar believes the book of Judges is far more reliable than the book of Joshua in this respect. And we know that from the book of Samuel and the Kings and so forth, there are still Canaanites in the land, despite what Joshua implies. And so each tribe is considered to have an allotment, and on your map you have this thing that's fronted by this. I apologize. The writing is so small. I have to have a magnifying glass. I actually tried to see if I could put it out a bigger piece of paper, but we didn't have any in the copier this morning. But this is kind of a rough chronology from stuff that are going to happen later, but behind it are some maps, and so. Like this map is in your handouts if you want to look at it more directly. But this shows the rough disbursements of the tribes. Dan, which is up in the very top, was actually earlier. Dan was over where that says Philistines, but the tribe of Dan could never quite take over that area. They never were able to get a foothold there. So eventually they moved north. Into the very top of the Israelite territory. So that's, if you're talking about the beginning of the book of Judges, Dan would have been further south, over by trying to get a foothold where the Philistines are today. But they took this tent shrine, this tabernacle, along with the ark, into Israel, and things aren't crystal clear, but the best we can piece together is it seems that these tribes had a kind of a loose confederation. They had some agreements among themselves, and part of that agreement including the transfer of the ark, would kind of move around Israel, and because that's where this holy presence is, right? And so wherever that holy presence is, there's spiritual power, but there's also this, politics is always trying to, it's always kind of work its way in too. So you don't just simply want to have, some tribe way up north having this really potent spiritual thing without your own having a chance to be close to it and benefiting from that. And so it would transfer around the tribes. They would take turns taking care of it and doing the incense and so forth during the time of Judges. I did print out a list of there were 15 judges in Israel, and the reason why the judges are significant is that they weren't like kings or queens. They were people who would rise up at a time of need and lead Israel for a period of time, and then when the need was over, and the need was usually military, because these other peoples were encroaching, and especially those Philistines were pretty pesky there. And also you look at kind of midway up on the right, that Ammon was also a country that was really trying to encroach into this area. So when one of these other peoples would be threatening, a judge would normally rise up. And the reason why they didn't have a king originally seems to be that they had this very deep philosophy that only Yahweh is their king. They're going to try, imagine like that group in Egypt, they've escaped, tyranny, right, of a pharaoh. They've been enslaved. So why would you rush to have some political leader with a military and so forth who could just, conscript you and deal poorly with you? So they weren't very happy to have a king. And then last week we also talked about how a lot of the people who were indigenous to Canaan, the powerful people were the people who dwelled in the city-states in the fertile plains, but the people who were kind of on the outs with the law or were tired of getting pressed by the leader or overly taxed or whatever, they went up into the hill country and they kind of formed communities up there, kind of apart from the power centers, and so they were also very kind of anti-government. It's interesting how some of these dynamics play out today, too, including within Christianity and so forth. You wonder why are these kind of radical right-wing people who are so against government and all this? Well, it actually goes way, way back to the early beginnings as well. And so you have these kind of bands of peoples up in the hill country, and then eventually they start to settle in. Last week we talked about how there was a new technology that came into existence right at the beginning of Iron Age 1, which is right around where this is happening, about 1200 BCE, 1100, 1000, terrace farming, which requires a lot of effort, and it requires not only a family but a social network to build these terraces and to defend them, so they get more and more able to live in this very arid hill country apart from the fertile valleys. And the fertile valleys can't really control the hill country because you can't get a chariot up into the hills, and so they're kind of living up there as this kind of these kind of I wouldn't call them libertarians, but they're kind of these anti-government kind of people who are kind of used to making their own decisions. And Yahweh, our God is is the only one controlling us, not human beings. And so this group comes up from Egypt. They start to mix with the people in the hill country. Last week we talked about these writings from the peoples these fertile valleys writing to each other about these apirus, who are kind of ruffians and like watch out for them. And Apiru sounds suspiciously close to Hebrew. So this is kind of this early frothing of the Hebrew people. They begin to mix a little bit, even religiously. We know that the word for the Canaanite high god, which was El, is also the generic word for God in Hebrew. We know that the next highest god in the Canaanite pantheon was Baal, and a lot of Hebrews had Baal names, including King Saul. His son was Ishbaal, man of Baal. So there tends to have been a lot of kind of mixing of this Yahwistic religion and seeing some similarities with the Canaanite religion, and both kind of merging into a fuller form of Yahweh religion that would become eventually this Orthodox Yahwism. Which isn't, it sounds kind of strange, but it's not that different from like if you have a Buddhist friend or a Hindu friend, whatever, and you actually spend time with them, you start talking about your beliefs, you realize, oh, that's an interesting insight. That does not contradict my own beliefs. Here it actually expands them, it deepens them. It makes me a better Christian the more I know about my Buddhist friend or my Jewish friend or my Muslim friend. I think that's really the context in which to interpret this. This is a lot of sharing from people and mixing. And it's not just like, later in the Bible they're going to write, about these terrible religions and, don't listen to them, don't, knock down their altars and so forth because, it's only Yahweh. But really, it is not against Yahwistic belief or the belief of one God. Like if you say, I worship only my God, it does not contradict your worship of one God to see in other people's worship, aspects of your God, in those things and integrating those things. That's what's happening. So they're doing this in the land, and eventually, sometimes there's going to be these encroachments of other peoples. And I want to focus just a little bit on one who's kind of unusual because she's the only one. She's a female judge named Deborah, and Deborah arises. Probably, if you're going to date this, it would be, around 1100-ish BCE. There's a threat from one of the Canaanites, these city-states that, people, the people in the fertile plains, they're wanting to, get rid of some of these pesky Apirus probably, and so they start to encroach on that area, and Deborah arises as a judge in Israel. And so if you have your Bible, we're going to turn to some writings about that. If you go, we're going to turn to the book of Judges, chapter 5, and of course you know exactly where to turn to find Judges, right? So, yeah, before Samuel, good. And I'll tell you the page number to make it easy for you. We're looking at page 220. Okay. And this is the story. It says the Israelites again, and there's also this interpretive layer that we find throughout the book of Judges. We find it in the book of Samuel. We find it in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. There seems to be a later editorial layer that has been, I mean, some of it might have been native to the writing of the text, but we definitely have a lot of evidence to suggest that during the exile in Babylon, which would have been, now we're jumping forward to the 6th century, they are asking questions like, why did this happen? We believe that, like, we were faithful to God, and yet the Babylonians came and they wiped us out, they exiled our people, and there were many answers to why that happened. One of them was, we've done wrong in God's sight, that we weren't pure enough. And that group of people, they're known as the Deuteronomists, because they seemed to be very heavily influenced by the book of Deuteronomy. They go back and they start editing, they start looking at all of Israel's history, and they're seeing, like, sometimes Israel really prospered, and sometimes they didn't. Sometimes things went really badly. And now, in their interpretive framework, like, you do well and God will bless you, you do poorly and God will curse you. This is in some significant biblical texts. They thought, aha, we have the key to why these things happened. And so they looked at the history with these eyes, and so they saw some kingships were very prosperous and some weren't. Sometimes they lived in peace in the land before kingship, and sometimes they didn't. And they associated this with faithfulness to Yahweh versus unfaithfulness. So we see already in the book of Judges, the Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died, another judge. So the Lord sold them into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor. That's one of those very fertile valleys and very, very powerful city-state in Hatzor of Canaan. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth HaGoim. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron and had oppressed the Israelites cruelly for 20 years. At that time, Deborah, a prophetess, wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel. So you see on this map, you see where Bethel, you see the purple Ephraim, and the very and right above Benjamin, you see Bethel is right there. In the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh and Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take position on Mount Tabor, bringing 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali and the tribe of Zebulun. I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you in the Wadi Kishon," that's in the valley, the Jezreel Valley, "with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand." Barak says, I will go, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. And she said, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." That's kind of apparently like, well, since you didn't trust me that the warlord came, like, you're not going to go unless I go, then the glory will not go to you. It's going to go to another woman. Then Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak summoned Zebulun, that's one of the tribes, and Naphtali. You can see them up there. So if you look at that big Manasseh blue, then those little two circles of purple and pink, Zebulun, and up above Zebulun is Naphtali, the green Issachar is going to play a role too, which is that purple one there. 10,000 warriors went up behind him, and Deborah went with him. Now Heber the Kenite had separated from the other Kenites, that is, the descendants of Hobab, the daughter-in-law of Moses, and had camped as far away as Elon Hazaphanim, which is near Kadesh. When Sisera was told that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called out all his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the troops who were with him, from Harosheth Hagoim to the Wadi Kishon. And Deborah said to Barak, "Up, for this is the day on which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. The Lord is indeed going out before you." So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 warriors following him. And the Lord slew Sisera and all his chariots and all his army threw him into a panic before Barak. Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot, while Barak pursued the chariots and the army to Harosheth Hagoim. All the army of Sisera fell by the sword. No one was left. And then it goes on to talk about how Sisera then escapes the slave of this woman named Yael while her husband is away, and Yael feeds him milk and curds, and the text is unclear. Either he fell asleep and she drove a stake through his head, or there's certain implications that's come in the following song that there may have been a rape attempt, and she threw. Either way, he got a stake through the head, and he dies. And so Yael, this woman, is credited with conquering Sisera, the mighty commander. Now, what's interesting is Judges 5 is thought to be, which follows, is a song of Deborah, this poetry, and it seemed there's the way the language is constructed and the meter of it and all this seems to indicate tells a lot of scholars that this is quite old poetry. Like this might be one of the oldest passages in the entire Bible is this one right here in Judges 5, written by a woman, or at least attributed to a woman. So very, very early poetry. We spent a lot of time in grad school trying to translate this. It's not the easiest because it's very old Hebrew. Think about like Old English. It's not all those words are similar, so you have to really do a lot of poking around. But this kind of gives a more kind of a mythological view of what's going on. When Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang on that day, or then they sang, saying, "When the locks are long in Israel, when the people themselves willingly bless the Lord." So remember, there's that command that the men wear their locks long. So when you're following your Yahweh's rules, "Hear, O princes, give rule, O princes, kings, give ear, O princes, to the Lord. I will sing, I will make melody to the Lord, the God of Israel. Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens poured. The clouds indeed poured water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath," now he is the previous judge in Israel, before Deborah. "In the days of Yael, caravans ceased, and travelers kept to the byways." The present, now that's the end of one thought, and it seems like the next thought merges into it, but there's a first reference that, Sisera has thrown the country to disarray, those trade routes we referred to last week, which I'll bring up again this week, they closed, and so the people were not prospering. And so that's why the travelers kept to the byways. And then, though, new thought, the peasantry prospered in Israel. They grew fat on plunder. This is because of what Deborah and Barak effect. "Because you arose, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. When new gods were chosen, then war was at the gates." In other words, when they strayed, that's what brought the wars. "Was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel? My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel, who offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless the Lord. Tell of it, you who ride on white donkeys," that's the elite, "you who sit on rich carpets, and you who walk by the way. This is very much a kind of a peasant revolt kind of thing going on. And to the sound of musicians at the watering places, they repeat the trumpets of the Lord, the trumpets of his peasantry in Israel. Then down to the gates marched the people of the Lord. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Abinoam. Then down marched, this is from Mount Tabor, right? The remnant of the people of the Lord marched down for him against the mighty. From Ephraim they set out into the valley, following you, Benjamin, that's another tribe who come to join them with your kin. From Machir marched down the commanders, and from Zebulun, there's another tribe, those who bear the marshal's staff. The chiefs of Issachar, that's another tribe, came with Deborah, and Issachar, faithful to Barak. Into the valley they rushed out at his heels. Among the clans of Reuben, however, there was great searchings of heart. You see where Reuben is down, they're kind of on the lower right there, that brown blotch. They're far away from, you see where it says Megiddo up north in Manasseh. That's basically where this battle is going on. So Reuben's far away, like, hey, this isn't our problem. You're calling us to come, but should we? So there were great searchings of heart. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. See, Gilead's just right north of Reuben there, that yellow. There they stayed on the other side of the Jordan. Hey, this is all happening far away. That's on the other side of the river. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. And Dan, why did he abide with the ships? Now you wonder, well, Dan's clear up north. How is Dan near the ships? Well, that's when Dan was actually down where the Philistines are trying to be where the Philistines are. So Dan doesn't come either. They've got their own problems. Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, settling down by his landings. Zebulun is a people that scorned, Zebulun, on the other hand, is a people that scorned death. Naphtali, too, these two tribes, on the heights of the field, they were strong and brave. The kings came, they fought the kings of Canaan at Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They got no spoils of silver. The stars fought from heaven. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent Kishon swept them away. The onrushing torrent, the torrent of Kishon. March on, my soul, with might. And what's interesting about that is if you actually stand above the Jezreel Valley looking out, you see Megiddo, and you see where the mighty Kishon is. And the mighty Kishon is just like basically an oversized irrigation trough running through the, where's this mighty Kishon, But what seems to be happening is, suggested by the poem, is that Barak has drawn Sisera into the valley with his chariots, but a sudden storm has come up and created a whole lot of mud. The chariots have gotten stuck in the mud, and leaving them kind of sitting ducks for these 10,000 warriors who are coming and fighting. That seems to be behind what's going on there. And so the Kishon would have overflooded and so forth. Then loud beat the horses' hoofs with the galloping of the steeds. Curse Meroz, says the angel of the Lord. Curse bitterly its inhabitants, because they did not come to the help of the Lord, to the help of the mighty against the mighty, to the help of the Lord against the mighty. Most blessed of women be Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women most blessed. He asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a lordly bowl. She put her hand to the tent peg and her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera a blow. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. He sank. He fell. He lay still at her feet. He sank. He fell at her feet. He sank. He fell. Where he sank, there he fell dead. That's where we think there may have been also a rape attempt, because if he's just lulled to sleep, he wouldn't have been falling like this. So, and it was often the case that women were raped as in warfare. And then it concludes. It kind of skips to the land where the area where Sisera has come from, and it skips to the mother of Sisera. Out the window she peered. The mother of Sisera gazed through the lattice. Why is the chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? Her wisest ladies make answer. Indeed, she answers the question herself. Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? A girl or two for every man, spoil of dyed stuff for Sisera, spoil of dyed stuffs embroidered, 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for my neck as spoil. This is like peasant people looking at these wealthy people saying, you scumbags, the mother of Sisera is applauding giving away our women to the men and taking our stuff. So perish all your enemies, O Lord, but may your friends be like the sun as it rises in its might. And then the land rested for 40 years. So that's a very, very early Israelite poem commemorating some defeat that they perceived as miraculous. Then you can sense the tension between the haves and the have-nots, all over this text here. But that's kind of a glimpse into Deborah. Oh, and I forgot I had this little map showing all these places. Let's see here. So you see where the red, where there's like a red shield and spears, that's where the battle starts to take place. There's the Sea of Galilee off to the right. You see this great valley, and Issachar is kind of the hill country, and you see Zebulun, but the Jezreel Valley to the left of that shield is this very fertile plain where you have some of these overlords there that they're lured up the valley, and that's where this conflagration happens. Yes?
So you said this is in Megiddo where this happened?
Near Megiddo. You can see Megiddo. They would have been camped at, the Sisera's army seems to have been camped out there. They were brought up, they kind of lured up the valley. Mount Tabor is on the other end of the valley. So they were about opposite end of the valley. Barak draws out Sisera deeper into the valley.
I was just wondering if the significance, like in the New Testament,
Yes.
is that
It's the same Megiddo. Megiddo will factor time and time again in the Old and the New Testaments, and it also factors into Revelation. Armageddon literally is from the Hebrew har, which means mountain, Megiddo, Mount of Megiddo. So the final battle of all of time, according, in the book of Revelation, is going to take place at Megiddo, and you still hear that in the news, people thinking that this is going to happen. It's kind of scary, actually, the way some of these things factor into current politics. And yeah.
So I might have missed it, but so was Sisera a native to the land?
Yes. So Sisera is would have been a Canaanite native of the land in one of these powerful, fertile valleys, that having his own city-state. And again, a lot of people considered these people oppressive. They went up into the hill country. They're trying to dwell away from him, and others like him. Yeah. I think Sisera was originally from Hatzor. Yeah. So that's, we're going to skip ahead now to the last judge, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on it because the last judge of Israel was Samuel. Samuel was preceded by Eli, who was the priest that was in the temple, that was his mentor for all those years. And there does seem to be had been a lot of corruption over time through Eli's sons. They were sleeping with temple personnel. They were misusing the funds of the temple and so forth. And Eli's just kind of ignoring this for all this time. That's that hard message that Samuel brought to Eli. But he starts out as in the temple as this child he was brought to the temple originally by a woman who had been barren, and she was kind of being made fun of by her husband's other wife. And felt oppressed and was praying for a child and promised that if she had a child, she'd dedicate him to the Lord. And it wasn't uncommon. It's kind of like, think about Europe in the Middle Ages where like the firstborn child might be dedicated to become a monk. She said, I will dedicate this child if you give me one to the Lord. And she had a child. He's dedicated to serve in the temple. So Samuel grows up in the temple, is trained there. And Samuel will be the last of the judges. What's going on here is you see these other people like the Philistines. You see Moab on the far bottom right. You see Ammon, and up above that it's not labeled, but the tan above that would have been their Arameans. But what happens during Samuel's time is that, like throughout this time, there'd be like maybe one people would try to make incursions in the land, or a judge would rise up and they would defeat that person. But in Samuel's time, it wasn't just the Philistines were a constant threat. The Philistines were doing that, and the Ammonites were also doing it. So like they can't. You see what happened in the Song of Deborah. You have this judge rise up and says, "Hey, we need everybody," and not everybody shows up. Well, maybe that could work if you're just dealing with a Canaanite overlord, or you're dealing with some Philistines only. But now you've got Philistines and the Ammonites both trying to make incursions from opposite directions. It's just too much. The people are like, we need somebody, not a judge anymore. We need a king. We need a king who can command an army and raise funds for an army and protect us. And so at first, according to the story, it's really fun if you want to read 1 Samuel 7 and 8. The people cry out to Samuel, "Hey, we need a king." And Samuel's like, takes it to the Lord. Says, "These people want a king." And God says, "Well, it's not the best thing we know, but they need a king." But Samuel's like, no, this is wrong. Like, you're our king. And God says, "Well, we got to be realistic here." And so even God is saying, the people want a king, and they should have a king, but just warn them. And so they gather at a place called Mitzpah. So let's see here. Well, you can see Mitzpah on that map, but that's not so good. Well, first of all, you see Shiloh. That's where this is where you see where the arrow is. Shiloh is where Samuel is, and so you see where the. Well, let me back up. Before the king, what provoked the people wanting a king was this action by the Philistines. This first one, they come from Aphek, and actually from around Philistia, and they make an incursion in. And what's going on is the Israelites come out to fight them, and they are defeated. So they retreat, and they think, like, what happened? Isn't God with us? And somebody gets the bright idea, hey, let's bring the Ark of the Covenant with us. And so Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, maybe they're the ones that propose it. Bring out the Ark. That's our powerful magic tool. We'll bring the Ark out, and then we'll defeat them. So they show up with the Ark the next time. In their presence, they fight the Philistines, and the Philistines not only win the battle, but they now take control of the Ark. And so there's this fascinating story of what the Philistines do. They take the Ark first down to Ashdod, which is on the coast there, one of those red circles there, and they set it up in the temple of Dagon, which is not unusual for a conquering people. They would take the gods of the other peoples and they would put them in the temple. They still respected those gods. They thought they existed. But they believed that since our God took over, surely then that God is subservient to our God. So we're going to respect this God, and so we're going to put him in the temple. They put the ark into the temple of Dagon, their high god. But it says that the next day they came in, and Dagon had fallen face down before the Ark of the Covenant, and so they what went on? They erect Dagon again. And then they go away. The next morning, Dagon's fallen face down again before the ark, and his head has come loose, and his arms have splayed off. And they're like, this is not a good sign. And then this pestilence starts to rise in the people of Ashdod. They're like, this is not, we need to get rid of this ark. And so they transfer the ark then to, excuse me, they transfer the ark first to Gath, and pestilence breaks out in the city of Gath. It's like, this ark is bad news. So they transfer the ark up to Ekron, up north, and same thing happens. Like, we've got to get rid of this freaking ark. And so they had to plan. They said, well, surely the God of this ark is mad at us. We need to make atonement for what we've done. So they make some golden tumors to recreate the tumors that have been occurring in them, and mice. They make golden mice, which a lot of pestilence was spread by we know like bubonic plague, things like that. So they make these tumors to try to then, replicate the injury, but they make out of gold as an offering to the god of the ark, and they put them inside the ark, and then they attach 2 cows to a cart, and they say, okay, now this is the way we'll know if this God is angry at us. If this God is angry at us, these milk cows, if we just let them go wherever they want, they're going to go straight to the Israelite territory. But if they hang around, then we'll know we've just been making this crap up in our heads. So we don't have to worry about it. Well, so they tether the cows, and the cows head straight to Beth Shemesh from Ekron there. So the people see the ark coming, and they're like, whoa, what happened? Coming out of its own accord. Actually, it's kind of dangerous to be around an ark, even if you're an Israelite, and so some things happen there that can, maybe somebody else wants the ark. So they transfer the ark up to you see up. If you look at Beth Shemesh, you go up and to the right, the Kiriath Yearim. They transfer it there, and that's where the ark stays for the rest of the days of the judges. Now, if you look at Kiriath Yearim, if you go over to the right, you see a town called Jebus. See that? Okay, that's actually Jerusalem before it's Jerusalem, and that will be significant. So it's just like a couple miles. Remember, Israel is just about the size of New Jersey, right? So these are not great distances, but it's just a few miles from what will later become Jerusalem, and that's where the ark stays. So at one point, the Ammonites, Kiriath Yearim. Okay, we're going to get to Saul and what gives rise to him. So they gather at Mitzpah, which is not depicted on the map, but it's roughly in the tribe of Benjamin, and there's this kind of long drawn account how Samuel discerns that Saul is going to be the king, and the people say, okay, well, we'll go with this, and Samuel gives them this long list of reasons, like all the bad things will happen when you have a king. Like you're going to get conscripted in the military, they're going to tax the heck out of you, they're going to take your best cloth, your best food for themselves, they're going to have courtiers, they're going to favor their elite and not you and all this. But go ahead, if you want a king, here's your guy. And they say, yes, we want a king, we accept all this, we're in trouble. But the problem is that Saul has just been this sheep herder, and he has no military service at all. He's very tall, he's very handsome apparently, he's very charismatic, but he has no military service. Well, that's taken care of for him when in Ammon, the Ammonites make an incursion into Israel up to, let's see, yeah, they're up, where it says Jordan River, there's a little town called Jabesh Gilead, which was in Israelite territory, and there's this king named Nahashta, who had this habit of, he would strike terror into the people around them by, if he took you over, if you resisted, he would take the males and gouge out their right eyes. Yeah, to kind of humiliate them, and also like, maybe we ought to surrender. The next people, like, maybe we ought to surrender. So the king of Ammon comes up and he besieges Jabesh Gilead, and the people say, and he says, surrender or I'm going to gouge out your men's eyes. And they say, can you just give us a couple days? We want to send word out to our people, see if there's any help coming first. If there isn't, then we'll surrender. And actually, Nahashta thinks this is a good idea. He doesn't think they're going to be able to muster help, and that will save him a lot of trouble and lives if they just surrender. So he agrees to wait for a couple days. They send out people, and this happens to be just when the key people said, hey, Saul, you can be our king. And Saul successfully raises an army then, and he goes out and he defeats the Ammonites at Jabesh Gilead, and the people never forget that. And this will also factor in. They just never forget the fact that Saul saved them from this horrible fate. And so that cements in, okay, Saul's got something here. It's God. He seems to be God's chosen people. He has come to our aid, and that's all well and wonderful. And then, so they confirm his kingship once again. It's a formal installation of him. And then some of the Philistines, once again, there's Mitzpah. See, if you look at the map, the Mitzpah is down where that arrow is in Benjamin, but now we're going to see the next map where Mizpah is at the top of the map, but this is the area we're talking about right here. So they are gathered in Mizpah, and then the Philistines come in from Ekron, and they make this big move into the land of Israel, and they come to this place called the Valley of Elah, and that's not depicted there, but that's where the arrow is, and that's where you get the story of David and Goliath. So that the Israelites are formed, and the Philistines are there, and the Israelites are outnumbered, and there's some nervousness about that, but they strike a deal. The Philistines propose, how about we just send out, we'll send out our best guy, you send out your best guy, they'll fight, and whoever wins takes over. And that is not actually uncommon in the ancient world. There could be one person, there could be a group of people who are said they'll fight it out so that we don't have to have so much death. But they send out this huge giant, and so according to the story, David is just a shepherd, and his brothers have been sent out to the war, but he's been left behind. He's just this young, short guy, but he's been come to give some food to his brothers, and then he hears that there's this big challenge, and everybody's quaking, like, who's going to take on Goliath? And David volunteers, and who knows how much of the story is actually real, but yes, it says that, okay, they accepted this shepherd kid without any background in military whatsoever. He seems to be the only brave person. We'll send him out, and we're going to let him decide our fate. I mean, it just makes no sense whatsoever. There's some alternate stories about how David will arise, but this is kind of the fun one. And so he's in battle. He got Goliath all geared up, and David he refuses Saul's own armor, which had been offered to him, and he's just got 5 smooth stones and a slingshot, and we know the story. He dispatches Goliath, and the Israelites are victorious. The alternate narrative is that basically when Saul is fighting the Philistines, David becomes part of Saul's, one of Saul's commanders. David seems to have, it's kind of part of this, again, this alternate story, that David seems to have been more than just a shepherd boy. He seems to be one of these people that the people in the city-states are writing about, the Apiru, these people that are kind of ruffians, and like David at some point has 600 men that are in his charge, and he's kind of, at one point there's a story about him being down in, where is it, Adullam, there's just south of there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He's out, and there's this guy named Naboth. He's got this farmland, vineyards and stuff. Not Naboth vineyard. This is Nabal. And this guy's got a lot of land, and David and his people and his troops have been hanging out there. And at one point, David approaches Nabal saying, hey, you know what? Notice that it's been really safe for you. It's been really safe. My men are kind of hungry. It would sure be nice if you could, supply us some food. I mean, gosh, you've been awfully safe. It's kind of like, you hear, you can just almost hear it. And boy, wouldn't it be too bad if we left, or if, whatever, like there's this implicit threat. And the ball's like, you go to hell. Forget it. You get out of here. And so David and his men are ready to then go in and wipe out Nabal and his men, but his wife Abigail finds out about it, and she's like, whoa, this is really idiocy. So she loads up carts with all kinds of food, brings it out to David, and says, my husband, he's an idiot. Nabal actually means foolish one. He's an idiot. No, we really want to take care of you, and we're really appreciative, that you've kept us safe. And so all is peaceful. A couple weeks later, Nabal just mysteriously dies, and Abigail, who's said to be very beautiful, becomes one of David's wives. It's just this really kind of sordid story. It's like some of the early beginnings of Israel are rather interesting. But so David seems to be kind of one of these traveling ruffians, but then Saul needs him for, to help with these battles against the Philistines. And David is, one thing that's very clear about David, he's an incredible military commander. He becomes one anyway, and he's extremely successful. And so what begins to happen is this song arises. Several places mention this song that about how Saul has killed his thousands and David has killed his 10,000s. And David has become this very close person with Saul, and now Saul's not so wild about David being around. He's getting a lot more credit for these things, and in those days that could be dangerous too if somebody is seen to be more powerful than you. I mean, you just might be killed. It was not at all unusual for people to dispatch people for power, and Saul is apparently very concerned about this. The Bible makes it very clear over and over again that David had no wishes to take over anything. It's almost like they protest too much, in fact, to make it clear that David has no designs on kingship whatsoever, and Saul is just continually ruminating about what David might do, and so Saul decides to act before David can, and then David starts to be on the run and fleeing from Saul from place to place, and Saul in pursuit. Eventually, David has to, the danger is so much that David actually goes to the Philistines then and says, hey, how about I work for you? And the Philistines are like, wait a minute, you've killed all kinds of people. And David suddenly realized, I made a huge mistake here. and so the story says that he pretended to be crazy. He starts wetting his pants. He starts to foam at the mouth. And they're like, oh, okay, we don't need to kill him. He's apparently gone off his rocker, so he goes away. But later, and who knows if that story's true, later we know that he returns and speaks apparently to the same king who has realized he's not crazy, but and for whatever reason the king decides to trust him. Maybe Saul has become, maybe he just realizes I need a lot of help, and so he does entrust David with some degree of autonomy. But what he doesn't trust David to go out into battle with the Philistines against the Israelites. And so what they do is they put him down in Ziklag, which is down the far south. And they say, okay, you kind of protect this territory. So what David ends up doing is he starts to make attacks on the Amalekites, which are just further south off the map there, which are also enemies of Israel. He starts to attack the Amalekites. He grabs their booty, and he starts secretly distributing it to the people of Israel and Judah in the south. So now he's gaining a following, like a great following in the south, because he is providing them with a lot of nice stuff. He saves just enough to give to the king of Philistia. Say, hey, I've done this for you. I protected. There was a raid, and I took over, and here's the bounty. But the majority he's given to the people in the south. So he's really growing a large following there. Eventually, then the Philistines. So there's David down in Ziklag. The Philistines, see, they've got this territory. They want to really solidify their presence in this Jezreel Valley here. That's kind of go, and what they're probably ultimately trying to do is secure that very fertile area there, and then push down and start to take over more from both from the seaside coming in, and from the north they could kind of crush Israel. So they make this incursion up there, and David says, let me go with you, I'll help. And the Philistine king is okay with that, but his commander's like, no, we know David's a very powerful military leader, and he will surely betray us if he's fighting his own people, so you leave him down here. So they leave him down there. This is handy for David to offer his service, but not be taken up, because if he's seen fighting against the Israelites, they're going to say, we don't like David. So it's, again, it feels like David is kind of doing a lot of puppetry, here. He's making sure that he's safe with the Philistines, but he's certainly not one of them. But if he's put in a position where he's got to fight the Philistines, somehow he works it so they're going to leave him behind, And so he's been building up a nice presence in the south, and the Philistines go up and they start to fight in the north, and Saul goes up to protect that area. So this map is like if we were now standing like at the Sea of Galilee or in that area, if we were now, the next map, it's like we're going to look south on the valley there. So you see the Dead Sea in the background. If we were in this map, the Sea of Galilee would be behind us. And you kind of see the geography of Israel here. You see the Jezreel Valley that's that we've been referring to repeatedly. It's in the right-hand side lower map. That very, very fertile, very powerful area. This is where the Philistines are, and that's where they encamp. Saul comes up from Mitzpah to Mount Gilboa, where that arrow is, but you see all the hill country there. So that's where the Israelites have primarily been, and these fertile plains that you see have been primarily where the powerful city-states have been. You see Mount Tabor, we referred to earlier, that from the Battle of Deborah, it's down the very bottom of that map. That's where Barak had holed up and then lured the Sisera into the valley there below. Anyway, Saul is outnumbered by the Philistines. He gets worried. There's a little black line that traces. He's heard about a medium, somebody who channels dead people in Endor. And so he travels to Endor. Now, I should preface this by saying there's been a falling out between Saul and Samuel. Saul has done some things where he's been taking matters into his own hands and not following in the ways of Yahweh. And finally, Yahweh says, Saul's leadership is done. I'm done with Saul. And secretly, Samuel has consecrated David to be the new king, very quietly, of Israel. So David now, he's already got a power center in the south, and Saul's leadership is going to come to an end, but Saul doesn't accept that, of course, and Samuel has since died, and so he goes to Endor, which is at the end of that black thing in the lower left, to meet with this medium, and apparently the medium successfully calls up the spirit of Samuel, and Saul's like, and Samuel's like, why are you bothering me? He goes, I'm worried. Are we going to be successful, or not? And Samuel says, no, you're not going to be. By this time tomorrow, you and your son will both be dead on the Mount of Gilboa. And Saul's like, well, thanks for that, and goes back. And sure enough, they engage in battle, and Saul's son, who has actually become secretly a friend of David's, Jonathan, and Saul both perish on Mount Gilboa. Whew, that's a lot to go through, right? Okay, any questions? What time are we? 11:55. Okay, so we'll finish up. So anyway, long and short, Saul's son Ishbaal decides, well, I'm the next in line for kingship. He pronounces himself king. He has some people pronounce himself king, but David has also been pronounced king. And so there's these two power centers. Bottom line, Ishbaal doesn't make it. He's murdered, actually, by one of his very commanders, who then seeks to turn and his commander, who had believed in Ishbaal, starts to believe in David. So he's murdered by his commander, but then his commander is murdered. There's a lot of murder going on, and transfer of power, and David eventually is the one who succeeds in that power struggle. And David, then his headquarters have been in Hebron here, because remember, while he's in Ziklag, he's been building up this, a lot of people who love him down in the south. David himself is from Bethlehem, so he's got a lot of friends here. He's not well known in the north at all. So one of the first things David does when he assumes the kingship is he decides that I'm way too far south. This is not politically expedient. The people in the north will never follow me. So David takes his private army. He's still got these 600 people, and he takes over the city of Jebus, which is now in that map is called Jerusalem, but it had been like the last one of the cities had never fallen to the Israelites. And David figures out a way to sneak up this spring that fed. There had been an opening in the city to tap into a spring outside the city gates, and it was hidden. But David somehow discovers, or his people discover it, and his right-hand person Joab takes some people up into that spring at night, and they sneak into the city, and they are able to capture it from within, which sent shockwaves throughout the whole area, because Jerusalem was seen to be the city that was basically unconquerable. And so David makes that his own private city. Like this is, and it's right, if you were to look at a map of eventually the north and south, here's eventually, when the kingdom divides, it's going to divide this way into the north and south. You see where Jerusalem is. It's right kind of in that border area between north and south. So he's really set up a capital that's like in the midpoint between, it's like the connecting point between the north and the south. And so David sets up that as his capital city, and so that becomes the political capital of Israel, but also he remembers that ark, that ark that has been paraded around that nobody wanted and has been sitting there out just a few miles from Jerusalem in Kiryat Yearim. David is wise enough to know that political power, like lots of political people want the religious stuff to come along too. And so David decides to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem and lodge it there as a permanent residence. So now you have this most holy religious object, coupled in the capital city of Jerusalem. David wants to build a temple, like a permanent structure there. And there's a story about how Nathan, his kind of right-hand priest, says, yes, that sounds great. And then he confers with God and said, no, actually, that's not so great. God says, instead, I will build you a house, and not just a house, a palace, but a house that will last forever. I'm going to make a covenant with you, David, that your house will continue to reign in Israel all your days, but don't build me a house. And I'll end with this, on this note, that, like what's behind this weird story? Why would there be resistance to building this wonderful house of God in this place? And I think it all goes back to those tribal roots. You got these people and this ark, and it's meant to travel so that eventually people feel comfortable with it traveling again. Like it's like from the days when they remember the good old days when power was shared, and we didn't have a king over us. And now what you've done is just taken that symbol of when power was shared, and we were peasants, and we're all in it together. And now we've got a king who's very powerful, and he's going to now take this very symbolic thing and bring it in, and now he's going to, instead of a nice tent, this little tent, he's going to make a palace for that. And this is giving this guy a bit too much power. A bit too much, but religion and politics are just a little bit too close here. And so Nathan, intuits this and says, no, don't build this. And he likely would have been also news to, it would have been very pleasing to the people in the north because they're David's power centers in the south. And so if he's consolidating all this power in the south, they're not likely going to be with that for very long. So we're going to end there. We got David in kingship in Jerusalem. He has selected Jerusalem to be a bridge so that he can eventually unite the north and the south. And he has either been constrained or constrained himself from building that religious power center, which is going to appease the people in the north who are kind of still like, aren't we all in this together? We don't want David to get too powerful. So he's going to do a lot of just very politically astute things to kind of bring people together. And there's about another 600 years I was going to go through today, but I think that we'll leave it with that, the beginnings of what we call the United Monarchy. So next week we will look at this up until the Babylonian exile and kind of what happens with the north and south. A lot to go through. I know it's a little hard because we don't have these people and we're not standing in Israel, can see these things. But you can kind of see how, these very holy things in the Bible, there's also a lot of kind of mucking around. There's a lot of, kind of political stuff going on. There's people who are seen as heroes that are kind of also anti-heroes. And one of the things I love about the Bible, actually, originally that really turned me off, to see how David is just so, he's Machiavellian at times, and yet the Bible, David eventually became in power, and his own people would have been in charge of recording these histories, and his own people recorded David's faults as well as his triumphs. And that to me is refreshing. It's would that we would do that today. All of our political leaders seems to want to champion how great they are, and they deny every bit of, corruption or, anything that would be blemishing. And here's this guy, his own people are preserving his faults as well as his blessings. And maybe there's a lesson in that, because David is eventually seen as to be the greatest king who ever lived in Israel. And maybe we need a few people who are willing to cop to their faults as well as their successes. All right. Well, thank you. And yes.
This is the first one that is on pictures, and it's been kind of overwhelming, but very informative. What is the scale of this map?
Like New Jersey. Think about New Jersey.
The whole map is...
Yeah. No, you can have those.
Traveling